Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to one of Globespan program. I am Nohar Singh, filling in as a moderator for Globespan 24/7, a platform that has been around for 6 years, offering a community service for all voices. The platform invites all political parties, civil and religious leaders to share their opinions and address concerns. You can contact Globespan 24/7 by calling 631-782-8694 or email us at support@globespan247.com. We have two segments tonight. One is to talk about current news, the Independence Parade out in Brooklyn, and also the rise of actually the bid for Azzuddin Mohamed bid for presidency. And the second segment will deal with winner takes all, what are the pros and the cons. Guests with us tonight is Senior Counsel Mr. Timothy Jonas. We also have Dr. Terence Campbell, a businessman, and our political scientist, Dr. Vishnu Bisram. So I want to get started with the program tonight. We want to lead off with the Independence Parade that was held in Brooklyn, and maybe Dr. Terence Campbell could just walk us through that and give us a little update on it.
Good night, Nohar. Good night, Vishnu. Good night, Tim. Nohar, thanks for having me back on the program. It's always a pleasure to join you, especially when you're in the role of moderator. The Guyana Independence Celebration Committee, I think, has the parade as an annual parade to celebrate the independence of Guyana. This one being the 59th. But this parade was somewhat different in that it had the additional goal of the march had two goals, I would say. One, to celebrate the 59th anniversary of independence, and second, to continue to keep the spotlight on the case of young Adriana Young and the cause of many, including myself, for justice for the Young family. The parade was well attended. It was a lively parade, well-organized parade, and kudos to Mr. Rickford Burke and his team. We had a number of Guyanese, including the Young family, received congressional proclamations. I myself was a beneficiary. Honorable MP Nima Flubess and Senior Counsel Roysdale Ford were amongst the other recipients. The parade was graced by the presence of the minority leader in the House of Representatives, Mr. Hakeem Jeffries, and the congressional representative for, I think it's District number 8 in Brooklyn, Honorable Yvette Clark. So all in all, I think it was I find myself some difficulty calling it a celebration because the focus was also on justice for the Young family. But all in all, it was a good event. Let me not say celebration, because it's hard to use the word celebration, even as we remember the tragic loss of this young lady. So it was a good event, Nohar, and well attended, well organized.
And Dr. Campbell, could you just bring us up to date in terms of where they're at? I know the last autopsy was conducted, but I believe now there are calls for Commissioner of Inquiry. Are there still calls for an FBI investigation? Where are we at with that?
So I am not perhaps the best person to speak to that, but I'll describe what I know what I believe the current situation to be. There was a second autopsy, and the pathologist did say that drowning is a diagnosis of exclusion. In other words, all other causes need to be eliminated, and that she could not make a determination at that point that there was death by drowning. And essentially, she called for what many others, including myself again, have called for, an investigation, a forensic investigation. An autopsy is only one part, a single part of a forensic investigation. I would venture to say, make bold to say, that no other element of a forensic investigation took place in this case. Even the fire service, to my mind, there was never any evidence of them moving around and doing any investigation to see whether any accelerants had been used to start the fire and so on. And I think belatedly, after I called and a couple other people called and asked why was there no fire investigation, then I think some report came out from them. So to my mind, nothing resembling a forensic investigation ever took place in relation to this young lady's death. And that is unacceptable. And I think the calls remain for a forensic investigation, though even I would be lower my expectations since at least the physical evidence would have been degraded both by the fire, by the elements, and by the passage of time.
If I may interject, Nohar, well, before I talk about other celebrations in New York on Guyana's 59th anniversary, something as basic by the firemen or the police, such as taking a poll. Every pool I know in the United States has a poll, and in fact I swam in the pool at Albion, and there was a pole there. The pole simply could have just passed around the water to see if there is any heavy object there, and if there were, they would have found the girl's body right there, sunk at the bottom. If indeed that is where she was, no one even bothered to do that basic investigation or checking. I was told that the girl was in the water, and subsequently, whether she came out or disappeared, nobody could give an accurate account of what really happened until this day, other than from snippets from family members. She was there, she wasn't there, she left, she didn't leave. The police said she was there, she left. So basic procedures were not followed in this investigation.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Bisram, and thank you, Dr. Campbell. All right, so I'd like to welcome all the way from Australia. We have a viewer, Abi Kaludi Ali. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, all the way from Australia. So we welcome you as a viewer in Globespan 24/7. I want to move on to the second news in the item, Azuddin Mohamed bid for the presidency. Well, this is quite a lot to talk about, and I really want to start first with senior counsel regarding, I believe, just a few days ago when Mr. Mohamed was taken into the courts, arrested. Senior counsel, can you talk a little about the arrest of Mr. Mohamed, and also if this is a civil case or a criminal case? Could you just comment on that a little?
Okay, well, not having seen the paperwork involved in the proceedings, I'm going to just speak off the top of my head from a general knowledge of what is most likely. We remember the face-off at Mohamed's residence when GRA officials supported by police turned up talking about seizing a car. And we remember a subsequent application by Mohamed to the court and injunctions granted against the GRA, stopping them from seizing the car. Now that is civil, not criminal. At that time, what was involved was a claim by the GRA that the car had been imported into Guyana to undervalue, and a claim by the GRA to be entitled to reassess its own valuation of the car and to retroactively impose a higher rate of duty on the car higher than the rate of duty they had originally fixed 4 years ago when the car was imported. So that question turns on whether they're entitled to do it, whether they have sufficient evidence to make a reassessment, and whether the legislation allows them in those circumstances to make a reassessment. What happened after that case began was that a criminal charge was brought against Mohamed for making a false declaration to the GRA, to customs, on the importation of the car. Now that is a criminal charge, and that is the charge that we saw him infamously, as our enforcement officers are prone to do, handcuffed and in the magistrate's court, with discussions as to whether he should be put on bail and that kind of thing. So that is a criminal process that can result in criminal sanctions, and that also is ongoing. So those are the two mutually exclusive proceedings that are running side by side, although they pertain to the same vehicle. One goes to the civil question of whether the GRA can make a reassessment and what the money liability will be, and the other to the criminal implication of whether a false declaration was made deliberately by someone importing a vehicle.
Counsel, if I may ask you, maybe enlighten me or the audience, how common is it for there to be a criminal proceedings of a misrepresentation of a value of a property or a vehicle or any possession?
Well, if you're asking generally whether you can have a single act involving a civil as well as a criminal issue, the answer is very often. If you attack me, Vish, you are assaulting me, and that's a crime, and you can be placed before a magistrate and criminal charges can be laid. But I can also sue you for compensation for the grievous harm that you've caused me by that assault. So one is civil, one is criminal. If you're asking me how often it takes place, how often the specific incident takes place, that the GRA comes back to an importer to say we're reassessing the value, I can tell you that it happens too frequently. And I can also tell you that there are strict restrictions on how the GRA can make a reassessment. You see, when you're importing goods, any goods, duty is calculated as a percentage of the value of the goods. So you are obligated to declare the value of the goods to the GRA when you import those goods. How you declare it and how you prove it usually is you show the invoice that you paid for the goods. You show, your receipt. But the GRA doesn't have to accept your valuation. They know, because they're importing goods every day, what the value of goods are. And if they're in doubt, there's something called Google. You can check. In this information age, it is very easy to check and see what a broad-based average value of any specific goods may be. So when the goods are imported and you declare them at $20, the GRA can go online and say no, or they can look at other similar goods that have been imported into Ghana and they can say, yes, $20 is fair. Or they can say, no, these are worth 40 and I'm valuing it at 40 and I'm assessing it at 40. So they exercise their discretion when you bring the goods in. And since they have that power, when that transaction is done and you've paid your duty on their assessment at $40, it's really only in peculiar circumstances that they're then entitled to come back to you 2 years later and say, no, sorry, I'm now putting it up to $80. And if you think about it, there are all kinds of factors involved. I'll give you one example. If I'm bringing in cement to resell in my business, and I've paid $20 for the cement, and I got to pay GRA $10 duty. When I sell the cement for $40 to make $10 profit, I don't want the GRA to come 3 years later to tell me they're charging me an additional $20 for that same cement. So there's a reason that this thing has to be done very carefully and at the time. That is one of the factors.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, if I may stick to the subject, I come through to Mary and I bring certain things and I lie on the custom sheet that I bring 2 pound of grapes when in fact I bring 10 pound grapes. So they say, okay, 2 pound grapes, you're exempted, and they found 10 pound. Will they charge me? I mean, the criminal charge for that? I mean, how often does one get a criminal charge for undervaluing the goods?
Probably depending on how serious it is and how often you get caught. But I am not in the GRA, so I can't answer that question. I can only look at the theory of what should happen. And what should happen is the customs people should look at your grapes, measure your grapes, weigh them, check their value, and decide what the proper assessment is in terms of calculating duty on your grapes.
Yeah.
And so that would also apply to any product I bring through GRA.
Anything.
Yeah.
Noah, if I could give a business perspective on this, because I think Tim has dealt with it adequately from a legal standpoint. The issue of cars and their valuation and GRA, as a businessman, I can remember going all the way back. This has been an issue that comes up from time to time, going all the way back to the 1980s. In fact, maybe even into the 70s. All of us should be old enough to remember cars that had been seized because they had been false declarations and parked around CID compound at Rabbit Walk in the late 70s to the early 80s. And I remember incidents with particular car dealers in the late 80s. It has come up in the 90s. The issue of valuation and seizure of motor vehicles and sometimes criminal charges, not always, it's not anything new. Usually the common thing is the vehicle is seized and then it's disposed of by the GRA. In fact, I remember even the GRA having some issues with and I believe this program is aired on Kaito News, having some issues with Glenn, Mr. Lal, over, I think it was 2 Lexus or 2 Land Cruisers.
Mm-hmm.
Let me also say, so it's nothing new. Criminal charges perhaps a little more rare, but I don't think it's unprecedented. And let me also say it does not stop. Personally, I just brought in a Land Cruiser and I had to pay $200,000 in duties. And a businessman did offer to me, he said, you know how much money you got to pay on that vehicle? I said, yeah, 200,000. He said, man, I'll get an invoice for you out of X country. And you can submit that invoice. And he said, how much you paid for it? I said, 78 point something. And he said, man, I get an invoice for 60, which would have been a significant saving. So, and in fact, let me say, when my vehicle was cleared, I had to produce all of my wire transfers and so on. Remember, 200,000 US, and it arrived, the value was accepted. I produced my receipts, everything. I produced even the advertisement that the company from whom I bought it with the price at the time that it was going to be registered. And this is before this is in December. This was not a point where the whole issue of the Lamborghini had become public. The supervisor or the person in charge on Lamaha and Camp Street, where the vehicle is going to be given a number, stopped the process, even though it had been assessed at Customs Headquarters, and said, no, there was a mistake here, and you got to pay 48 million and not 40 million.
Yeah.
But a mistake had been made. So in summary, over the years, there's always been issues of it with motor vehicles simply because the tariffs are so high. The duties and taxes on these vehicles, especially as you get into the high end, they're so high. And so shenanigans have continued over the years and probably will not stop, even with what is in the public domain at this point in time.
Yeah, yeah.
If I
Dr.
can say
Bisram,
no, of course, shenanigans will not stop, but it's a mistake to say that the usual thing is to seize the car. What Terence just described is the process of importing the car, and he described a continuous process when a mistake was found. But what he also described, and called it wrongly the usual thing, is the seizure of cars back in the 80s that were lined up along Rapid Walk. No, that's not the usual thing. If the cars are imported and the transaction is over and the cars are driving on the street, to go back and revisit your assessment is a much more narrow concept. But it's a mistake to try to equate today with back in the 80s under Burnham's government, when it's much more difficult to use the system and use the court process to try to achieve what is the right thing. What's happened here is we've seen the system work, we've seen an application to the court, and we've seen the court point out that there are restrictions on the power of the GRA to seize the car, and there is a due process that must be followed. You don't turn up at someone's gate to seize it. So don't say it's the usual thing. The usual thing in Guyana is indeed that under the two governments we've had extraordinarily high rates of duty. We've had playing fields that aren't level, and we've had favors given to family and friends. So some people get off with light duty and some people got to pay the full thing, like my unfortunate friend Terence. But that is what is usual.
And the procedure, the process is not fair. It's not, as you said, it's not a level playing field.
Yeah, so Dr. Bisram, that leads me to a question for you. Clearly, there hasn't been too many instances of clawbacks, which is what we are seeing here, trying to claw back in terms of a value. What's your thoughts on this? Do you want to expand more? Because you seem to feel as if this is not something that happens very frequently after the fact when the vehicle was already cleared.
This is the first case I know of. There probably are others that someone's vehicle is being reassessed. And so the question one have to ask is why now? Why not prior to June of last year? And why this particular individual? Why not others? I'm sure others also undervalued their vehicles. It's a common occurrence in Guyana. I've met many people all over the country who told me what needs to be done, and even approached me if I want a vehicle, what they will do to get it in at a very, very low duty. Fortunately or unfortunately, I've resisted these kind of opportunities, but I don't want to be part of that kind of activity, and I don't want to be a part of that kind of governance in our country.
Dr. Bisram, a few weeks ago, we did a program called Weaponization of the System. I believe that was the name of the program. Do you feel in this instance that the system is being weaponized, being the fact that Azzuddin Mohamed has announced his presidency bid?
I can't say if that's the reason behind it, but I leave that to the public for there to be a public judgment on matters.
Sound like a real politician for sure.
Yeah.
Scientist, right?
I'm in training.
Yeah. Good. So, Mr. Jonas, I want to go back to you regarding the GRA. Mr. Mohamed referred to a conversation whereby the head of GRA, the commissioner himself, was rejecting registering the vehicle. Is the commissioner also part of this transaction where he would have visibility onto how the transaction was done? And has anyone sought his comments on it?
I'm not aware that anyone sought his comments, but I thought that statement by Mohamed was self-incriminating. You see, what Mohamed has done is he's taken the response to say to the public, I brought this car in and I was held up, I was stopped by the GRA, and I complained to the president, and the president sorted it out. So he knew and he was involved. He then shows WhatsApp messages and that kind of thing. We don't know if this is true or not, and anybody can manufacture a screenshot of WhatsApp messages. I'm not going to make the assumption it's true. I do note that it hasn't been denied specifically. What the regime has come out to say is that at no time did Mohamed say to the president, here's an invoice and present a correct invoice, or that I am presenting an incorrect invoice. So the inference there is that I'm not part of this dishonesty. For me, the larger question, though, is if the GRA is an autonomous entity, when Mohamed submits his invoice and makes his declaration as to the value of the Lamborghini he's importing, he has an obligation to make an honest declaration. If his declaration is not accepted so that it's held up, the GRA has an obligation to assess the value of the Lamborghini. I would like to know who in the GRA assessed the value of his Lamborghini so as to bring it in, because to me that's very important information. But what to me also is very important information is in what circumstances does any member of the government interfere with the operations of the GRA so as to process a transaction which Mohamed says the GRA had stopped because they didn't like the figures they were seeing and they thought it was suspicious. The GRA should be autonomous, as a system should be doing its own work, and there is no way that you, me, Terrence, or anybody in government should be calling anyone in the GRA to smoothly oil a process of clearing anything. We don't know if it's true, but what needs to be clear is that our system needs to have the confidence of the people that that can't happen. Yeah. And what we're seeing more and more in Guyana is no one has the confidence to say this undermining of a transparent system, this undermining of an autonomous body, this interference by politicians can't happen. Guyanese know it can always happen and does always happen. And Terrence just talked about it, and Vish just talked about it. That someone would call and say, man, I can sort this out for you. We have corruption endemic. And it is going to lead us into failed state status.
Yeah. Dr. Campbell, any chance of any whistleblowers? I mean, do we have any protection for them in Guyana on a matter of this significance?
I think, first, well, before I answer that question, let me say something to you, Nohar. Again, at the time that this vehicle was imported, it was a matter of public, the valuation that it was assigned was actually a matter of public record. I have shared, I will say two things, and they're not necessarily contradictory. That one, I'm not going to be as diplomatic as Vishnu was. I will say it is a weaponization. But I will also say that when you enter into the public domain, and you're going to enter in opposition to any government, you must play bat and pad close together, because you know, and I don't think it's unique to Guyana, that they will come after you. So when that particular Lamborghini was brought in, there was at least one customs broker. And I took when this matter reared its head, I went quickly to his page and took a screenshot just in case he decided to remove it. And I think this was back in 2020, who had a post, and his post said, so a Land Cruiser is more expensive than a Lamborghini now. I'm referring to you to say that the matter of this Lamborghini and the valuation assigned to it, and the duties and taxes charged was a matter of public record since 2020. It attracted my attention in 2020, and I cannot understand why it would not have attracted the attention of members of the government and people at the GRA. And that then brings me, but it was not it was not an issue for them at that point in time, no harm. It is now an issue for them. And this is why I'm saying that I will not hesitate to say that it is a weaponization. Bat and Pad were not close together. And now that vulnerability is being exploited by the state. So there is nothing secret about the importation of the Lamborghini, about the value assigned and the duty paid. If you were in business and had your antenna up, it was a matter of public record. It may have flown over your head. It may have flown over even Tim's head. I don't know. It may have flown over Vishnu's head, but it didn't fly over mine in 2020. And now, to my mind, the focus on it, and I'm not justifying what was done in 2020 at all. As Tim says, corruption is endemic in the country. But at this point, it is being exploited. That vulnerability is being exploited for political reasons.
Yeah. And just a pause there to recognize Virginia North Calawan from Minnesota, and we have Colin Singh from Canada. We're trying to recognize and get some of our viewers more involved, understanding and giving them credits for being with Globespan all these years. So I want to continue on with Azzuddin Mohamed bid for presidency. And in the next topic, I want to go to Dr. Bisram on it, the next part of it. Dr. Bisram, we have seen a significant amount of Guyanese coming out to meet Mr. Mohamed. Most recently, I think was in Region 1 and Region 2. I think Devin could bring up some of those videos. Can you tell us from your political scientist knowledge, this incident that has happened a few days ago where he was presented before the courts, do you feel this helped him, boost him, kept his profile higher, given the fact not only this incident where he was drawn before the courts, but also other incidents of late where he has been addressed in so many different manners?
I was in Guyana, just left a few days ago. And I could tell you everywhere I traveled, the name resonated everywhere. Everywhere I traveled to do polling, people are asking or saying that they're supporting Azzuddin. And these are people who once supported AFC, PNC, APNU, PPP. Significant numbers of people are following him or supporting him. Whether they will vote for him on election day 3 months from now, I don't know. But I can tell you he does have enormous following. If I'm not an advisor to the government, but if I were an advisor to the government, I would just have left the gentleman alone, let him go ahead and do his political campaign. Every move that the government has made so far has led to an increase in his popularity. It certainly has not led to any decline in the number of people who are following him. At least that's what I'm picking up in traveling around the country. Now, can he sustain it for 3 months? I don't know. I can't say at this point in time.
Dr. Bisram, in speaking to Dr. Rose, who was also conducting some polls out in, I believe, Region 6 in those areas, and the numbers you're calling are very much impactful. He's making statements as such that Azzuddin Mohamed is actually leading in some areas over the president. Do you see that in any way? I mean, any comments towards a statement like that?
Well, Guyana is very large geographically, so more than likely, it's quite possible for him to lead the president, to lead any political other political parties in particular sections of the country. I did look at that video in Maruka in Region 1. I was astounded at the number of people who showed up there. Whether they came out of curiosity or for other reasons, I don't know. I wasn't there. But it does appear that he has a significant following everywhere, among every community, in every age group you could think of.
And Mr. Jonas, this popularity and of people coming out to meet and listened to Azuddin Mohammed, would you comment towards it more being a frustration with the current system they have been under for so many years, or is it his philanthropic type of work that he's doing? What would you comment on that?
That's an interesting question, Noah. I know that the Mohammeds started their campaign over a year ago, and they started doing surveys over a year ago. People have come into me from middle of 2024 saying that folks were in their village asking questions, asking who they would support, and had confirmed to me their support of Azruddin Mohammed in the event that he ran, and everybody assumed that he would throw his hat in the ring. So that is not deception. That has actually been happening. Surveys have been done. People have been asking in the villages, and the villagers have been responding at the grassroots level, which is what I think is most concerning for the two parties. Not just the PPP, although the PPP I think has more to worry about. For both parties, it's people on both sides of the fence that are looking with interest at Azruddin Mohammed. You talk about the philanthropic works. Okay, I look at that with a grain of salt. But there is no doubt that wealth has its own aura. And this enormous wealth has enormous aura. So yes, people are swayed by that. They are looking for a deity. They are completely frustrated with the existing government that has not demonstrated any change from the corruption before 2015. In fact, has gotten worse. They are totally disillusioned with the attempt to rig the 2020 election, so they don't want to go in that direction. And between the devil and the deep blue sea, they are faced with this new opportunity, this new option that looks like a self-made wealthy person, looks like he knows what he's doing, is calm in, I have never seen him riled, is calm in the face of that kind of belligerent hostility that you see from the two large parties. And at the grassroots level, is not a threat because he's not loud, he's not belligerent, he's not trying to intimidate, he's just quiet. And I think that is attracting interest at the grassroots. Now, the reason I say that's a problem for the large parties is that since 1992, there has been a gradual but irreversible erosion of the advantage that the PPP has had through demographics in Guyana. So in 92, 97, they had a cushion of a couple extra seats in Parliament. And as we all know, by 2011, that actually boiled down to a minority. So in 2015, when they lost, and then in 2020, when they won, both of those occasions were by a one-seat difference, 5,000 votes. If you think about the 2020 election, although the PPP earned 17,000 more votes than the PNC did, the fact is 10,000 of those votes went to third parties, votes by people who desperately did not want either of the two, and and held out the slightest hope. They clutched at a straw for a third party. Now, those people who have totally rejected the two parties and the grassroots folk who traditionally would blindly put their X based on ethnic loyalty, but now are looking at with interest at Azruddin Mohammed, it only takes 10,000 from each side, and suddenly the PPP doesn't have a majority in Parliament anymore. I think that is why Azruddin Mohammed is getting so much attention from them. And I agree with Vish. The more attention he gets, the more obvious it is that it is a weaponization of state institutions against him, rightly or wrongly, because the fact is, a Lamborghini was brought in for $75,000. You can't get away from that. But nothing is done. It happened smoothly. Everyone knew. As Terrence said, I remember that post, Terrence. I do remember it. A Lamborghini now cheaper than a Land Cruiser. I remember that. And nothing is done. And the reason nothing was done, it didn't even make a ripple then, is because we are so accustomed to corruption. Nobody even looked twice. Nobody thought twice. Everyone said, yes, here we go again. And they moved on with their lives. 4 years later, you see weaponization. of the institutions against Azzuddin Mohammed, but it is backfiring. It is a bad policy because what it is doing is keeping him in the spotlight. It is demonstrating that not just corruption in the GRA to let the Lamborghini in and now to prosecute him for the same Lamborghini, but corruption in terms of prosecuting him. So you're weaponizing the police prosecution force now. And that is giving him sympathy while keeping him in the spotlight. And then you see the man in handcuffs, somebody who should never have been in handcuffs, arrested, who should never have been arrested because he's not a flight risk. And you realize that the heavy-handed, oppressive approach to him is something that we may all be at risk of. Yeah. And suddenly you are alienating yourself from the public when you're the government imposing that kind of oppressive regime on the man. I think it was a mistake.
Yeah. Yes, so Dr. Campbell, I'm reading a post here. Gita replied to Moose, and they think Globespan is working with the Mohammed. And on that same note, there's been a lot of there's been some posts after Mohammed's visit to Region 1. I believe he shook a police officer hand, and there's been many posts. This police officer was immediately transferred. Dr. Campbell, rather than condemning their comments, what comment could you give our viewers tonight to say how healthy it is for us to be able to have a discussion? And if anyone has been following the discussion regarding the Mohammeds, I don't think anyone is condoning the Lamborghini issue. I think we're just having a discussion of the issue itself. So can you make some comments to our viewers that it is important to our society to get the views from all different sides rather than placing us in a box to say that we are working for any specific special interest group?
Well, Nohar, you know, this is the silly season, right? And so those kinds of comments are not unusual. They will come from different sides. Some, I guess, PPP supporters will accuse Globespan of working for the Mohammeds, and that could be because they're previous contributors to Globespan who have been seen in close proximity to the Mohammeds. But to my mind, the discussion tonight, and every time that I've either listened or been a part of a Globespan discussion, Globespan has both in the moderator's comments, as well as in the way it chooses its panel, sought to get the widest possible range of views on any subjects, any subject, the Mohammed or Mohammeds or anything else. But I'd like to go back, and this is important, and I just wish that more people would listen to Globespan, because at no point, I mean, I think we have clearly pointed out that there may have been issues surrounding the importation, and we've also pointed out the weaponization. So I think the discussion has been extremely balanced. But let me go back. You know, tonight is one of those rare nights when Tim and I seem to be in complete agreement. But I'd just like to texturize some of his comments. He did say that I think one of the things is that we have an economy that is running away from the grassroots. And it doesn't matter whether we give them 100,000 cash grant and so on. It really cannot, it doesn't adequately compensate them, or they're losing ground in this oil economy. And they are looking for something new. In a number of polls, and I think Vishnu can speak to this, in a number of polls that I was involved in getting done, polls that where I was not directly involved, but where I was privy to the results. And this is between November and February. The block of undecided, and my comments on this attracted great anger from the vice president. But the block of undecided voters was massive, ranging from about high 30s up to 50%. And that is quite unusual at this point in time in the cycle. And my interpretation on that large block of undecided, and I'm using undecided very loosely, or people who said they're not going to vote, and people who said they were unsure who they would vote for, and people who said they preferred not to comment. But that large block, my interpretation is that they were looking for something new. And so, in fact, in the very last poll, which included Azruddin Mohamed as an individual, say, well, who of these people you would like? He surged in that poll. And when you look at where he drew a large part of his support from that undecided block that's there. And I'd like to point out one thing. There was a video that went kind of viral, and it was of an Amerindian woman speaking at Campbelltown. Very long piece, she spoke for quite a bit. But one thing she said, I think this is important if we're looking at this through a political lens. She said to Azruddin, she's speaking and she says, I know you're a wealthy man. This is not an exact quote. I don't know how you make your money, and that is your business. But, she goes on. So I think we see the PPP try to paint Azruddin in a negative way about his money and how it may have been acquired or not, and the sanctions. But that to my mind, is not playing well with the grassroots. They really don't care. And so in addition to the continuing down that road, in addition to the attacks on Azruddin, as Vishnu says, it's only lifted him in popularity. So if I were the PPP, I would really rethink my strategy as to how I deal with Azruddin Mohamed.
Yeah, Dr. Bisram, I'm coming to you next. Just a few house announcements. And by the way, some of GlobeSpan goals are to build a society that's much more informed from all sides, a society where one can change from within so as to affect changes on the outside, a society that can reason together, and a society that can work together to keep hope alive. Our vision continues for a country where its moral and ethical standards are measured by the word of God, where the wealth reaches all Guyanese. So if we to imagine a Guyana that becomes a society where Afro-Guyanese, Indo-Guyanese, Amerindians, and all races value each other as human beings.
Mhm.
Imagine a Guyana where her wealth finally becomes your wealth. So if you want to contact GlobeSpan, call us at 631-782-8694, and you can email us at support@globespan247.com. I just want to mention again that our objective at GlobeSpan is to be able to bring in views from all sides. We're not here to be of any specific special interest groups. We're here as Guyanese. We're here of people that have a love for our country, and we certainly want to be able to see the improvement comes from listening to each other. Dr. Campbell mentioned that Nohar, we are in silly season, and we would get comments of condemnation and accusations. Quite honestly, Dr. Campbell, I feel we've been in silly season for the past 59 years, given the strides we have made as a country. There is not much room for difference of opinions in discussions within our public domain, mostly condemnation. And I believe that's what GlobeSpan is trying to change. It's trying to change whereby we could take all criticism as information, all condemnation as a sign for us to rise above it, and not for us to be able to put ourselves into a box so we are not able to understand the insecurities, the fears, the injustice, and all the other concerns from our fellow brothers or sisters, be it Afro-Guyanese, be it an Amerindian, an Indo-Guyanese, or whoever you are. So that has been GlobeSpan, why we have been holding on for 6 years, and we certainly want to continue to hold on. I want to move on to our next topic, but just before I move on, we received a flyer from the District Attorney of Queens. Devin, do you have that flyer? I just, I promised, I just wanted to post that flyer.
No, Harry, before you move on, I wonder if there's one last thing you'll allow me to say about this GRA issue, because it really does bother me, and I think we need to look at solutions.
Are you going to say we have a whistleblower? Go ahead,
If I work for you, and I know you can hire me or fire me, when you, Nohar, call me to say, please pass this Lamborghini through quickly, I'm going to pass the Lamborghini through quickly because you can hire me or fire me. That's
Yeah.
the bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in 1996, the PPP passed legislation creating the Guyana Revenue Authority as a board. And in that legislation, they provided for the president to appoint the Commissioner General and for the board to manage the entire GRA. And every last member on that board is appointed by the minister. So when you are working in the GRA, no matter how senior you are, if you get a call from a minister to say, I need you to do this quickly for me, you are very aware that that's someone who can fire you tomorrow, who can make your life difficult, who can prevent your upward mobility. You will do what he says. If the board was run and had 2 PNC, 2 PPP, and 1 third-party member, so 5 members, so that the government of the day, whichever one it is, PPP or PNC, did not control that board.
Mm-hmm.
When you heard a Lamborghini go in for $75,000, 3 people on that board would want to know why, and it would be fixed immediately. The reason that things aren't fixed immediately and the reason that corruption is allowed is because everybody on that board is appointed by the government of the day. That can be changed by a majority opposition in parliament. And I want Guyanese to understand this. It is my mantra. If you put 3 opposition on that board, no Lamborghini would have passed. And today, in 2025, there wouldn't be prosecutions, again, at the instance of the government weaponizing the same GRA against the people that they had previously given preference to when they were friends and family. There needs to be autonomy and there needs to be transparency. We need a majority opposition to make sure that the board of the GRA is autonomous from the government.
Yeah. So folks, we have quite a few people listening from the diaspora, and many of them live in the New York area, Queens area. Devin, do you have that flyer from the district attorney?
Yeah, it did show up.
Yeah, so Miss Melinda Katz is announcing Guns for Cash, and it's happening on June 14 from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. You can contact the district attorney office, and surely if there's any instruments you would like to submit in exchange for cash, it's available June 14th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Thank you, Devin. Dr. Bisram, Mr. Jonas' comments just now, Timothy Jonas' comments was a good preface into the next topic, which is winner takes all politics, the pros and the cons. Do you, Dr. Bisram, feel that winner takes all politics, can you point out any pros from this, given our history as it relates to Guyana?
Certainly, winner takes all has not worked in Guyana. From 1957, one could say, 1961, we have seen the ethnic racialized race riots of the early 60s. We have seen the rise of the authoritarian state under Bornemism. And even though the various parties committed to changing the constitution in which the winner will not take all, we have had that from 1992 with the restoration of democracy till this day. And, we have had too many problems in the country under winner takes all, regardless of which political party is governing, whether it was the coalition from 2015 to 2020. We have seen attempts at rigging. We have seen attempts at violating the Constitution. One could even go as far as saying that there was attempt at at the establishment of an authoritarian state during that latter 2-3 years of the coalition. And we have seen what passes for governance over the last 5 years. Certainly people are not pleased of what's happening in Guyana. There's a lot of disillusionment and so on and so forth. So no, whoever makes up or comes up with this concept that winner takes all should not be part of Guyana, I am in agreement with that. Otherwise, we'll continue to have the kind of governance we have in which one political party dominates. And by extension, when we say one political party, in essence, we are saying one race. Because we have racialized parties in Guyana. I mean, we must not get away from that fact.
And to all our viewers out there tonight, I'd just like everyone to know that former President Donald Ramutar was invited to be on this panel tonight. He couldn't make it, he wasn't available, and he did have some comments, which I will probably read later in the program. But yes, he was invited because to join the panel tonight. Mr. Jonas, I suppose there may not be much prose from your side, given the history and some of the comments you have made, but anything you would like to add to what Dr. Bisram just mentioned?
I like his segue that we're dealing with two race-based parties, because that's the truth. And whichever party is in power, its supporters will oppose any sharing of power by saying those people are obstructionists, and if we share with those people, nothing will get done. And especially now with all the free oil money, you hear, look at all the good that's being done, all the roads and the infrastructural works and this brand new bridge over the river. With those obstructionist people on the other side, we wouldn't get anything done. So they defend the winner-take-all system by castigating the other side. And each does it in their turn. And when each side is in opposition, they stay quiet, hoping that the incompetence or oppression by the existing government will be sufficient that they can woo over a few of the liberal thinkers at the next election so that they can go into the seat of power and enjoy the winner-take-all, implementing exactly the same oppressive authoritarian systems that those other people that they hate are now exercising. So in 2015, we saw all the commissions and all the boards, whether it's GPL or GAIO or EPA or GEA, all of them totally defenestrated and friends and family put in to all of those organizations, and new licenses granted to friends and family, new systems granted to friends and family. And then we saw a reversal again in 2020. Each side stays quiet, hoping that they can enjoy the winner-take-all. And neither of the two large parties has made any meaningful move to appreciate that if this government is to be run by a government that represents all of the people, then both parties need to be there. And the only way both parties can be there is legislation which puts both parties in the housing. So Central Housing Board is run by both parties present. Chronicle, both parties present. If that isn't done, we see more of the same. We see a Chronicle board now manned by PPP favorites. If the PPP lose the election this year, they will all be thrown out. They will be manned by PNC favorites. But the quality of the product of Chronicle will not improve. We see a general decline of everything from Gaisuko to GPL to Gaiwa, because friends and families are in there running it for political expediency to the detriment of the country, to facilitate corruption, to fill pockets, to feather nests. The winner-take-all cannot change if there are only two parties seriously contending at the election. So there is nobody who is supporting a coalition of parties to have an end result that only the PPP and the PNC realistically are there at elections, so that you are voting for one of two options. Anyone who is supporting that is supporting a winner-take-all to the total exclusion of 50% of the country who may have supported their ethnic party that only got 49% of the votes. That is where we are.
And Dr. Campbell, share some of your wisdom on this, but both Mr. Jonas and Dr. Bishram talked about a two-party system, really. Is that, I mean, that's been historically where we have been, but shed some of your wisdom in terms of how do you feel about the winner takes all, and how can we move away from if this winner takes all, if it hasn't been working for us?
I think part of the reason that the winner takes all doesn't work for us is exactly what Vishnu referred to, the racialized voting patterns in Guyana. If we had a more homogeneous society, then I think we would see swings in the voting. It's interesting that Suriname just had an election, and I noticed that Ronnie Brunswick, who had been a vice president to Santoki, if I remember. Vishnu, am I correct?
He was.
And Ronnie's party now has swung to the other side and now supporting the NDP. We haven't had those that we haven't had. You see, in Suriname, there isn't this big dominance of the two blocks. You have Afros, you have Hindus, you have Muslims, you have the Javanese, and even within the Afros, there's a break between those who are from Paramaribo and those who are Bush Negroes and so on. But we really just have two blocks. Tim has been a fierce advocate of third parties. But as I've said before on this program, we can't guarantee that there will always be third parties. And but Tim is right, that none of the two main parties, the PNC nor the PPP, have taken any significant steps towards changing the Constitution. I do agree that if we have shared governance at board levels and even higher, that some of these things will be reduced. For example, I don't want to toot my own horn, but everybody knows that I've raised hell as a single individual on the Natural Resource Fund. And I've taken that matter to court in a matter that will be heard soon in the next week. I don't think I'm violating the gag order by saying that. I think for me, you pointed out, Nohar, that to your mind, we've been in silly season for 59 years. We've been very immature about our approach to governance and politics in Guyana. And to my mind, only constitutional arrangements. Tim says legislation, and I don't think he's omitting, I separate constitutional amendment from ordinary legislation, but I don't think Tim meant to exclude that. I think we need to have maybe a higher threshold for legislation, and especially key legislation. Maybe 60%, a vote on 60% or higher, maybe for the budget, might help. But these things are complex, and that's just my idea. But I think we need a national discussion on these matters, but it's hard. Tim and I were involved in an organization called RISE that spent about 2 years working on constitutional reform efforts without much success. And we were abused for even working on it. Really and truly, we can't give up. We have to get leaders who are able to see where our society is, understand the cause of our failures. This lack of power sharing, the corruption that we see, and the fact that it can't be addressed or hasn't been addressed, is tied to the lack of power sharing.
Yeah.
It's tied directly to the winner-take-all system.
Yeah.
And I can't claim to have the answers as to how we get that change right now. And it may be through the route that Tim is advocating, but of third parties, of people looking to other avenues, other parties to place their support. But once that happens, to me, the gain has got to be consolidated by constitutional amendments and legislative changes. We've got to lock it in because we're in a matured society.
Nicely put. So, Dr. Bisram, just a few countries I want to point out that has coalition government. There's quite a few of them over the world. You have Germany, Netherlands, Sweden, Belgium, Spain, Finland, Ireland, India, Israel, Japan, Malaysia, South Africa, Kenya, and I could just continue on the line where their governments are basically based on coalition. But one of the comments that President Ramuttar said to me, and he gave me an earful earlier today, saying that when there are coalition governments, that they tend to jockey to stay in power rather than governing for the better of the entire nation. Basically, what he was saying was essentially everyone is just trying to keep their position or secure what they feel is right, and there's a certain amount of compromise there. I also was talking to someone else from the West Coast, Demerara, yesterday, and they also point out that their concerns will be that if there is a coalition government or there is a minority government, then nothing is being done in Parliament or the country does not move forward. Dr. Bisram, what would be your comments in those areas? One, that is, there are so many coalition government that seems to be working well. I mean, you're talking about some very powerful countries I just mentioned. And then on the other side of the coin, they're saying that some people have concern that there may be stagnation.
How does a coalition dominance differ from a one-party dominance? It's the same kind of dominance, if indeed. For me, a coalition allows for compromises. You have, each group has its own interests, just like the United States. The American government, one can say, is a coalition government. It's a coalition of interests, and people advocate for their interests. So in Guyana, there's no harm done. I don't think there'll be stagnation as long as the coalition agrees to compromise. You can't just hold a position and say this or nothing. Then it's not a coalition. It still remains one-party dominance, regardless of which party is in office. I believe in 2011 to 2015, had the then ruling party entered into a coalition with others, they might have been able to achieve quite a bit. And in fact, I do know that one of the other parties in the parliament was willing to enter into a coalition, but the then ruling party was not willing to engage in any form of coalition, and so it led to the dissolution of parliament and early elections. I think coalition governments are best for any country. It has worked in everywhere. It has worked in New Zealand, Australia. It has worked in almost every country in Europe. Regrettably, the coalition collapsed in Holland yesterday after 11 months in office. But generally speaking, Holland has had coalition governments for decades, and it has worked. And so have other countries. Germany, as you correctly pointed out, has had a coalition government for decades. Yeah. And so has Belgium, Sweden, Switzerland, all of them.
Yeah. So, Mr. Jonas, Dr. Jerry Jailal wrote to me, and I was asking that if Globespan could, have a discussion regarding the recent bill that was just passed, the Oil Pollution Prevention, Preparedness, Response, and Responsibility Bill. And he's saying that there was much there for discussion. So I kind of went and I pulled up in the United States of America when a bill is introduced to either Congress and then subsequently over to the Senate. There's many different committees, there are many different hearings and insertion and omittance. But one of the key aspects of a bill being introduced in the Congress is this. Many times there are public hearings, and a matter of this importance of where we're talking about oil pollution, which could literally erode everything that, every advance that we have made financially and even affect our neighbors in the Caribbean. If there was not a winner-take-all government in place, would such an bill be able to pass so easily? What would be your comments on that?
Now, 4 months ago, the government introduced a record-breaking budget and used its majority in Parliament to pass it. 3 short months later, the government announced in Parliament that it was introducing an amendment because it needed more money and used its majority in Parliament to pass it. I'm disappointed that the conversation segued into a discussion about a coalition. You see, if you got 33 seats in Parliament, you win.
Mm-hmm.
This has nothing to do with coalition. You got 33 seats, you win. So any law you want to pass, you go into Parliament, you pass that law, you win, no matter what the opposition says.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in Guyana, you have the Indo-based PPP and the Afro-based PNC. And what we have seen historically happen is that smaller parties, however successful or unsuccessful they have been independently, have merged and joined with one or the other. So WPA, AFC, Peter de Gar back in the day ended up with PNC. The civic movement in its time ended up with the PPP and became part of it. So disappeared, subsumed into it. So again, we have those two. And when those two go to the elections, whichever one wins 51% controls Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to talk about constitutional reform in that regard, therefore, is to walk up a road that has an inevitable dead end. Because if one party is in government with 51% and has all the marbles, because it has a winner-take-all system, and the existing legal structure allows that party to appoint the whole board of the GRA, the whole board of the EPA, then that party will not agree to constitutional reform. And therefore, you will not change the law to require 60% votes to approve a budget. You will not change the law to change the Constitution because that requires a large majority.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to understand what the rules of the game are, and you have to figure out the solution using those rules. In 2011, when AFC as an independent third party, together with the PNC, controlled Parliament, unfortunately, they didn't have the vision or the competence to understand realistically what they could do. And the reason for that is they, as part of Guyana culture, as part of our political culture, were hedging, wanting to get into government. And I want to say that when you're devising a structure, especially a structure to run a country and to create a legislative scheme, you have to do it with the aim to protect the weak, to protect and to safeguard the party that is actually out of power. If you just have one election cycle where that status quo is restored, where 2 opposition parties control Parliament,
Mm-hmm.
they can change each law to put boards in place where oppositions are represented. Terence, with justifiable pride, talks about how much noise he made in the Public Procurement Commission. I'm sure the government mightily regret that back in our happy renaissance in 2020, when we were all happy and chummy, that they put him in there. But he's one voice. He can't change anything in that public procurement because he's outvoted every time.
Natural
But
resource fund, not public.
I'm sorry, Terence, forgive me. But I would invite him to consider if he, as the third party representative, was in that board with 2 PPP members and 2 PNC members, what could be accomplished? And that board can be created by an opposition majority in Parliament without changing the Constitution, so that everything that he quarreled about in that forum, he, as the third party representative, would be certain that every single issue, he would have 2 people on his side. And the right thing would be done. He wouldn't have to kick and scream. He would be getting his way. And that system would apply across the board. So when he says you can't be sure there'll be a third party, you can be damn sure there'll be a third party. Because if the legislative structure simply said that on that board, PNC appoints 2, largest opposition party appoints 2, second largest opposition party appoints 1. And if there is no second largest opposition party, the leader of the opposition appoints the chair, I promise you, every election after that, you will have a third party just to hold that fifth seat. So the system can work on the existing rules, but it needs a third party. And as long as we have blind allegiance and blind loyalty, catering for supporting one of the two large parties, hoping to squeeze into government with 51%, we perpetuate the poison that is Guyana's politics now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Dr. Campbell, just before you add a few more on what Mr. Jonas is trying to say, one of the trolls, and I like to give these trolls some attention because they kind of give you an idea what they're trying to get across. Chris Parmanan said if only two parties, why Guyana have all these small parties contesting election? We do have small parties, and of course, you could even add a few things there, the weaponization against some of these small parties. But taking into context what Mr. Jonas just mentioned, you care to add anything there?
Yeah. So Tim is advocating legislation that will say the two seats on the board for the main party, the party in government, two for the first opposition, one for the third opposition. There might be more than two opposition or three opposition parties in it. And he seeks to cover that again by saying, well, if there isn't that, then the leader of the opposition appoints the chairman of the board, I guess, with a casting decision. The problem, it's all legislation. And let me go back just a little. In 2018, I think it was, a minister of the government asked me if I had reviewed the Natural Resource Fund bill. And I said, no, I hadn't. And the minister said, why haven't you looked at it? And I said, well, I have a feeling the PPP is going to win the next election and they'll just change it. And so I never read that Natural Resource Fund bill. I never read the 2019 Act, the bill or the 2019 Act, until I was appointed to the Investment Committee of the Natural Resource Fund. I say this only to say that as long as we're talking about simple legislation, circumstances can change and the legislation can be amended. And this is where Tim and I differ, where I say that you have to embed some of these things via the Constitution. I want to just go back quickly to the coalition issue because both Tim and Vishnu referred to the 2011 to 2015. And you pointed out former
Can I ask
President.
Terence how you propose to do that? How you propose to embed it in the Constitution?
Hold on, I'll come back to that. Let me just finish this point. Noah pointed out former President Ramatar's comments about stagnation. And I want to say that that is a personal view of President Ramatar. And it is part of his lived experience. And I don't think anything will move him from now on until he kicks the bucket. And I hope he lives for a very long time. I have no issues with former President Ramatar, but he sees the opposition at that time as being very obstructionist to everything that he was trying to do, Amelia Falls and so on. And really and truly, some of those things could have been avoided, as Vishnu pointed out, if he had if they had embraced power sharing. So I think he has a very dim view based on his lived experience that we will never change of any kind of power sharing in Guyana. Going back to Tim's question, Tim, the only difference between you and I on this subject, I agree that we need power sharing, diverse views on the board, on the boards of key state agencies and so on. But the only difference between you and I is that I don't believe that ordinary legislation is enough, as I pointed out with the Natural Resource Fund, because the Natural Resource Fund 2019 was passed. As soon as the PPP came in, they changed they revised the act, and then 2 years later, when they realize how much money, they say, no, this amount of money that we are putting down is not enough. We want more. They went back and made an amendment. So all I am saying is, for me, on a practical level, is that once we get the construct where the opposition parties have a majority, they must utilize whatever political capital they have immediately to take the same changes, some of the same changes that you are advancing, and embed it in the Constitution so that no future government can unravel it without maybe a 2/3 or 75%. But that's the only difference between me and you. Because if it's left as ordinary legislation, trust me, some government will come along without any shame, without considering any embarrassment, and remove it. And I cite the Natural Resource Fund Act as an example. It was there in 2019. The people said, no, we don't like it, we change it. And when they got giddy on the money, they came back and amended it so that they could move from 75% to 90-something% depletion.
So, in other words, just so that I can be clear in my mind, you're agreeing with me as to the majority opposition in Parliament, and you are hoping that the majority opposition in Parliament can use its influence to leverage, by negotiation, that 2/3 vote to change the Constitution.
To embed some of the this is not only a single issue, but to embed those same changes that you are
in the
advocating.
Constitution.
Yes,
Right.
that's all.
So the starting point then has got to be a majority-controlled opposition in Parliament.
Yes, because I don't think I have not seen the leader who will. I have not seen the leader yet in Guyana who, even if he wins a majority, will go to the opposition and say, let's make some changes for the benefit of all Guyana, and let's make some benefit for power sharing. So on a practical level, yes, it may have to be an opposition-controlled parliament.
Will have to be, not may, must be, will have to be. And
we must not
therefore,
give up hope that one day Guyana might have the kind of leadership that will emerge and say,
therefore,
Yeah.
as long as you are supporting one of the two large parties, then you are defeating the prospect of an opposition-controlled parliament.
Yeah, let's keep hope alive, guys. Let's keep hope alive. Mr. Before I go to you for your views, I wanted Devin to post a poll, and the poll basically is asking the question, is winner takes all politics good for Guyana? Just to get a sense of how our viewers are reacting to the program tonight. And viewers, I hope you're able to see and the differences and the coming together of opinions that could help shape our nation. We are not in the legislation, we are not in the government, but we are in the office of the people that have a voice. Dr. Bisram, in your closing statements, and we're running close to time here, in your closing statements, given all that you've heard today with winners takes all politics, what would you say to the people of Guyana, the Guyanese people as a whole, even in the diaspora, how they can affect changes to bring about a government that it would be for all people and for the interest of the country?
Because I do poll and I write in the newspapers, I wouldn't want to guide people how to vote, but I would advise people to think independently about their own personal interests, their family interests, the national interests, and don't think in terms of racial interests, party interests. Vote with some kind of intelligence about what you think is best for Guyana at this particular time. This is a very, very key election. We have seen enormous wealth coming into the country, some being used wisely, some being used wastefully. And so I wouldn't like to see a continuation of that kind of expenditure. I think we should spend our money conservatively. I have seen travel around and I've seen roads that are falling apart. I don't think these things are being thought about very constructively, very carefully about how money is being spent. And of course, we all know, as Senior Counsel pointed out, corruption is endemic. And it doesn't matter which political party is in government. We have seen it under the previous government. we have seen it under all governments. People have to take governance very seriously and vote wisely.
Thank you, Dr. Bisram. And Mr. Jonas, your closing statements, comments? Keep hope alive.
I'd like to thank Terence for being forthright. And I would like to say that I agree with 98% of what he has said, because he's quite right that the weakness in an opposition majority is that next elections that opposition might change and the laws might change. He's right. But he's also right that a constitutional majority is an impossibility. So you can't change the Constitution. And therefore, the only possible first step is to try to procure that opposition majority. Now, I'm going to say something frankly, because I see that one you just read, Noah, one of your trolls pointing out that you appear to be supporting the Mohammeds. I could never endorse the Mohammeds, because the appearance to me is that they tried to import a Lamborghini and declare it at $75,000. And for me, whoever conspired with them or facilitated them, that's a separate conversation. They are equally culpable. But if you try to import a Lamborghini and declare it at $75,000, if those facts are true, you don't get my support. And that's the end of the discussion. But that being said, I hope they run. And I hope they get 2 seats. I hope they take votes from the PNC and the PPP. I hope AFC runs independently and takes votes from the PPP and the PNC. Because either of those options lends credence and lends plausibility to the possibility of an opposition-controlled parliament. And that is the starting point to any hope. Without that, there isn't any hope. We will continue to have a board of the GRA appointed solely by the minister, central housing appointed solely by the minister, and the Natural Resource Fund, where the minister appoints everybody, and he will learn from the mistake of having appointed Terence.
Great. So hope is still alive with Mr. Jonas' comments. Dr. Terence Campbell, I want to just read one of the comments here, and I'm going to ask that if you answer this comment with also hope. This one doesn't give much hope. It's saying Guyana is a tragedy of failed state where all its citizens wish to leave, either by immigration or by suicide. All of the persons on that panel have foreign citizenship. Glad my family left in the 1980s. Dr. Campbell, what could you give our fellow Guyanese brother, Mr. Clark James? What hope can you give him that can make him feel differently, that there will be a future that we could look forward to as Guyanese?
Let me first correct the point about foreign citizenship. I think I might be the only person who is still not a citizen of any foreign country on the panel. So I'd like to correct the individual for saying that. I'd also like to say to them, and this is by choice, I have been 28 years a US resident. Well, in July I would have been. And I have never taken up US citizenship simply because I have been concerned about Guyana. And I would like to say to that person, I agree with them, that in essence, and we're not a typical failed state, because there's no widespread, I wouldn't say there's widespread hunger. There is poverty, but there's not widespread hunger and the kind of things and massive insurrection and gangs controlling the country like we have in Haiti and so on. We're not that kind of a failed state. But I do agree, I will not disagree with the failed state description, because people are still leaving Guyana. People still look for a future outside of Guyana. People still say to their children, some of the biggest business people in Guyana, myself included, our children live abroad, right? And I think I hate to call it an example, but a massive business like Gafour's, I don't think any of his children are there running Gafour's. So to that extent, Guyana is a failed state. But the hope that I give to them, they are people like myself, and even when they hold foreign citizenship like Tim, and even you, Nohar and Vishnu, who are still engaged, still locked in, still working for a change in Guyana. And if there is no, I would like to see, I'm not going to be shy about this. I'd like to see a change of government. But if there's no change of government in the next election, I'd like to see a minority government. And I would like to see the parties, all parties, both those on the opposition and whoever is the minority government, put constitutional reform as its first priority. Forget everything else. Because if I think all of the other ills in our society can be addressed if we have some constitutional reform. If there is power sharing, for me, the biggest problem in Guyana is education. But if we have constitutional reform, then maybe we can have opposition influence at the education ministry, and we can get the changes that we need to see in Guyana. So to that person, I want to say, yes, it is a failed state and people still want to leave. They're unhappy with the situation in Guyana, but there are many of us, both in the diaspora who hold foreign passports and both like myself who don't, who are working. This bothers us day and night. We are stressed. We have conversations, but we are not giving up. We want to see a change in Guyana. We'll keep working for it.
And the result, yeah.
And just for correction as well, I also hold Guyanese citizenship, which I don't plan on giving up anytime soon anyway. And as Terence correctly pointed out, I have remained engaged in Guyana from the time I left until now.
Yeah, yeah. And the result of the polls is when it takes all politics good for Guyana, we got a big 10% yes and a bigger 90% no. So based on the discussion tonight, I think everyone were able to bring those points. The takeaway, of course, in some cases would have been a majority of opposition parties that could affect constitutional change, multiple seating on the boards, which would reflect different political parties, so that there's no one political party that are able to make sole unilateral decision and could pass legislation or budget amendments to the tune of, we just seen 59 billion that was passed just a few months after the 1.3 trillion budget was passed. And of course, legislations like the oil and gas pollution bill. So I want to say thank you to all our viewers, thank you to all our guests, and thank you to Devin Bassoon as we continue to have discussions, bringing about different point of views and be able to come to some sort of an of consensus or some sort of an agreement, and thereby keeping hopes alive for all Guyanese. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, all viewers. Have a good night.
It was a
Thank you,
pleasure.
Noah.
Good night, everyone. Good to see you all.